With the election out of the way, wanting to focus on pursuing a deeper relationship with Bangladesh, particularly seen through the lens of US-China competition, not wanting to do anything that could push Bangladesh closer to China. And so I think that's one reason why we've heard a lot less from the Biden administration about Bangladesh's domestic internal situation in the last few weeks and in the last few months. So I'll end there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael, for those comments and on broadening the conversation today. Again, a reminder to all participants that the Q&A function is open if you have any questions for the author, which we'll get to after the panelists have concluded. I'll now turn to Dr. Sriradha Datta to provide her comments on the book and to take the conversation in whichever direction she sees fit. So Sriradha, over to you.
Thanks, John. Pleasure to be here. And as always, very happy to read the latest book by Professor Riaz. Always a valuable contribution to the political narrative. I would want to start from the last page, literally, where, as he just mentioned, this was done just a couple of months before it went to before elections. And he ends with this line where it says that Bangladesh stands at a crossroad and whether the country will cross the Rubicon. Quite clearly, it has. And I think that's where I want to look at a little bit more. He, of course, earlier in that same paragraph, he talks about the fact that there is likely to be some pressure thanks to the economic crisis, and that's how the outside world would, help Bangladesh do the course correction. But here at the point is that, again, who are the actors who are going to help you do the course correction? Clearly, China and India. And you also, and I think very rightly, have no arguments with that at all, that they have been part of ensuring that this particular government does what it does in terms of its misgovernance, in terms of its completely ignoring democratic norms. But and this is a question to myself too, that suppose, I'm looking at 2014, I'm looking at 2019, I'm looking at 2024 January. There is no two ways about the fact that India supported. But, and last few days, coincidentally, there's been some more conversation that I've been having at various panels. Had India not supported the way it did, would Bangladesh not have been so creative? The reason I'm asking is, in 2008 December election, where, and that's probably one of the few points of slight difference that I have with you, where I think it was an extremely free, fair, robust election. She was certainly voted. I mean, a majority of the Bangladeshis wanted her back. And so, you alluded to an Indian role there, and I think I do accept the point about Pranab Mukherjee that you've mentioned. It's well-known, it's in the memoirs. But I genuinely believe that given what Bangladesh had gone through 2006 October, to that interregnum period and the caretaker government, that there was a kind of a now, all across a common feeling of wanting Sheikh Hasina back and ensuring that the multi-party democratic system comes in place. But soon after, I think couple of, not even a full year, the 15th Amendment brings in, does away with the caretaker government, right? This was the time when there was a pretty much robust parliament in place. It's very largely a very large two-third majority of Awami League, yes. But at the same time, there was opposition. But, and you didn't, of course, the detailing of that particular caretaker judgment, you recall they had set up a committee, Sheikh Hasina herself, I think of 7 members, of which 4 said that, yes, do away with the caretaker government, but let's wait for 2 more elections because, the polity will be strengthened along the way. So 2 more elections. One of them completely clearly said that no, caretaker government has to stay. The other 2 had somewhat caveat there, saying that, we need to go through the parliamentary process and all of that. And also, I think there is a particular legal protocol or regime in place that when you have a committee, put its suggestion and feedback, it has to go through a process of some stands for 2 weeks, then it's put out again. But she, of course, Sheikh Hasina at that point of time, completely bulldozed it, and in less than 24 hours, put it to the parliament saying that it's being done and done deal. And everybody in the parliament just went along with it. And where is now that the point here is, and of course, on 2014, we've known, and I completely clearly agree on the fact that the BNP didn't find, and it's true for the divisiveness of the polity of Bangladesh, that BNP didn't think the conditions were correct for them to join elections. 2019, we know about the fiasco which you've talked about. This again, while I have absolutely no point of difference with, and I totally agree and more with you in terms of how you've traced the, this whole very, very authoritization of that, what is happening in Bangladesh now. It's an extremely, it's a journey which is very well etched. But at the same time, what I miss here, and that's something again I keep asking, and I have friends there, is that where is the opposition? I'm not saying in terms of political participation. I'm just saying that, we've always talked about the fact that there's always about 32% for one political party alliance, which is Awami League, and there's always a 30 to 33% vote strength for even the BNP. So for 3 terms, you're going to let your voters completely in the margins. What do you expect? And here again, and that's another question I think here, that, we've always talked about democracy, stability, and all of that. Clearly, and again, I think you've written about that, and we've spoken about that elsewhere, that, the rich have become richer, and Bangladesh right now is going through a political crisis. Again, I feel the bailouts are going to be from the 2 close, neighbors. So I don't see how there will be any course correction, really. I do not see something of the kind that happened in Sri Lanka happening to Bangladesh, because India is going to jump into the fray if anything like that happens, just like it did for Sri Lanka, because the conditions were different. So here, I think all through the last 15 years of the way Awami League's been able to consolidate and taken, completely repressive measures, it's transcended all norms of democracy and everything else. The role of the opposition, of course, we know about the street, they're out on the streets, and I know about the 10,000 members that were put in. But I'm saying generally as a vision, while I do follow a little bit of what was happening with the BNP, one thing that I miss before the election, because even then there was a kind of a suggestion that suppose there would be there were 2 main suggestions. One was bring back caretaker government because we can't fight elections. The second was please step down. I mean, quite naturally, because given the mistrust that this particular group has vis-a-vis this political party, that was a clear, but of course that wasn't happening. But even when all this was, up in the air, because we were not really sure if that was, I was very hopeful. But I did not see the opposition have a plan in place. Something similar to what Michael just mentioned about Indian opposition. I mean, they've got a loose group in place, yes, and they've made some noises. But what is their vision for India, other than the fact that I'm not happy with the present incumbent, which is similar to what I saw. And I'm completely convinced that if it was free and fair elections, this political party or this leader would not have returned. I mean, there is no 2 ways about it. But I'm saying we need to also see how is it that and again, I was so very disappointed, because having seen or examined the 1990 when Eshad stepped down, when the first of its kind, when we saw everybody out on the streets together, right? Whether there was bureaucracy, whether the political parties, across the board political parties, left, right, center, everybody got together. I was very, very hopeful, thinking that this is the Bangladesh that I know. That why are they not out on the streets? What is it that's keeping them? One will, of course, know about the fear, the repression. We've seen what happened to that, the 2 main movements that happened. One on that bus accident, and of course, the Shahbag movement. I'm aware of that and what that brought to the table. But somehow the absence of the civil society, that's something that we've always talked about. I mean, in glowing terms about the strength of civil society in Bangladesh. How is it? And that's a question that I ask myself. I'm asking you because you go into such details always. That what is it? I mean, while we know there's a very strong political elite who has, shall I say, the entire business is consolidated within their hands. Which keeps them there, and they will ensure. And again, I think we discussed this, I think, last time when we were together physically, that when Bangladesh is going down the rabbit hole, economically, the same group will come back, ensure whatever money that's, the flight that we've seen, they will ensure that the country kind of stays back. It doesn't go the regressive road. But while that group is there, but Bangladesh is known for the, which it didn't have earlier, the burgeoning middle class professional group that has come up. And there are so many other pockets of excellence in Bangladesh. And I find that, are they too tired to deal with it? And I know in terms of, the everyday struggle that a Bangladeshi has. I mean, look at the parkas, look at the issues that they've had to deal with, not even talking about the ready-made garment, which has really affected that growing middle class also to a large extent in terms of the workers and their rights. But I'm not able to put that together as to how is it that in fact, I know you, I've said this publicly, and I think all of you are aware that when I was there in Dhaka during the elections, the government numbers were something, and I think I said this again a few days ago, that I've been in Bangladesh, I've seen the kind of joy celebration elections are. This time there was a completely dead, buried Dhaka. I didn't step out of Dhaka, but I went to almost every constituency Bangladesh has. So I clearly understand that people have absolutely zero hope as to anything. But why? I thought Bangladesh always, and I thought that's again been an example in South Asia, that who take the destiny in their hands. They don't let. What is the fatigue now? While there's a one elite which of course backs this particular government, but what about the rest of the country? And the fact that I think there's 10%, and some suggest even lower turnout of voters, which tells you the fatigue they have with this particular government and the misgovernance of this particular. But why is it that we don't see them coming out in some form of the other to not only express another way of they want to see Bangladesh, but to ensure that such kind of a rule doesn't exist. And I don't know where that goes. And I just want to have a couple of points about the India issues that you've mentioned. One of them is, you've talked about the kind of lists in terms of what is it which is being done at the bilateral level, and the fact that we have a huge trade gap. Even today, we have a huge trade gap. But I think that's really an issue within Bangladesh itself. It's not so much about India really, because I think when in 2012 we let go of all the trade barriers, non-tariff and tariff, there was a huge, again, lot of things that we were buying, including ready-made garment industry, which was a demand by Bangladesh government for years. So that's something. But in terms of, and I think now at the business level, economic level, we don't even discuss deficit anymore, because we are aware of the fact that Bangladesh has a deficit also because it lends to their ready-made garment industry, the raw material, which is actually one of the largest components that goes from India, apart from the essential commodities and other things. But at the same time, there has been, and I would think in terms of the listing that you've done, while there is no two ways about the fact that given Sheikh Hasina's addressing the security concerns, and I think this book also seems to have skimmed over that particular phase, 2001 and 2006. While I'm not agreeing to what, I'm following up to what India does in terms of supporting a government which is clearly not democratic, but I'm saying those nightmares of 2001 to 2006, and it's not only about the northeastern camps, I think, which you mentioned, but a large kind of the terror blast that was happening. And there has been many, many evidences and, citations about how even when it was a Pakistani non-actor who was part of that blast that India was facing across from east, north, west, south, everywhere, there was always some kind of a Bangladeshi link, whether in terms of the funding, whether in terms of even a chappal which is made in Bangladesh kind of a thing. So those nightmares are something which I think the book skimmed. But again, I believe that the world, Bangladesh has moved beyond. But right now, what I feel is that, there hasn't been an attempt by the opposition to even reach out. I mean, there has been one particular visit during the first years by Khalida Zia to India, which was a few, and subsequently again to 2019, just before that election, was a group of BNP friends who had come here. We had interaction, even at VIF had called them. And there were several other interactions that took place in Delhi. But I'm saying nobody sincerely, genuinely reached out to India to convey that this is a different Bangladesh that we now hope to propose or hope to build. Because the fear, the apprehension, India doesn't want to go back to that phase. I'm not arguing for what India is doing is correct or anything like that. I'm just giving you the rationale behind it. And I think the opposition or anybody who's non-Awami has not conveyed correctly to India. That what Bangladesh stands for. Right now, we always believe in, and I think that it's only Sheikh Hasina who puts up the secular fabric. And I've often said this, and I know we've discussed this many times, that minus Sheikh Hasina, we don't even know what is the character of Awami League these days. There's a whole lot of other public discourse we understand about the pro-China lobby, which is working very hard. And, there's no question about the fact that irrespective of what US interests are, China is going to ensure that it's able to, and they work with every color and hue in Bangladesh, unlike what India is. So, they certainly have a method in their madness here. But for India, and again, let me reiterate that this is no way am I supporting what India has done. And I think all of you are aware of the fact that I'm pretty much open about my opinions with this particular thing in India. I'm saying there's no actor in Bangladesh has made an attempt to show India or the world that they have another vision for Bangladesh. It's fallen back on, and it's what Awami League is doing, or what the Sheikh Hasina is doing, what the small elite is doing, is all what we get to see. We have not seen an alternative side of Bangladesh, and that is for me a huge disappointing factor. And I think that's something that which I keep coming, that I always thought that the Bangladesh I know, which is out on the streets, is something that is completely quiet now. And just yesterday, somebody called me to say, is there a midterm election due in, because of this Quit India movement and things like that, which we know is a social media movement. I'm not sure whether, but I keep saying that this is a messaging. It's not possible for India and Bangladesh to cut that interdependence on economic front. But it's a clear messaging by the youth about what they think about this government. But then what is somebody doing to address it? And I know probably I've run out of time here, but if possible, I'll come back on a second round. My problem is I scribble my own notes and I can't read them correctly myself. But for now, I'll stop here and I'll come back here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sri Radha. And to all of our panelists, thank you for conducting this masterclass. I'm learning a lot as the discussion goes on. So now I will turn to Dr. Ahmed Shafiq al-Haq, who I hadn't had the pleasure of talking with before, but Dr. Haq, over to you for your comments.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Mushfiq and Right to Freedom for inviting me to join this discussion on yet another worthwhile contribution by Professor Ali Riaz. Autocratization is a category that I don't think anyone else had applied to Bangladesh leaders before, but this is a good start. The problem is we really don't know the rationale, the thought processes and actions of autocratic leaders. They're difficult to understand, mainly because the context and circumstances vary across countries. So Professor Ali Riaz has drawn upon examples from Poland, Hungary, Bolivia, and a number of countries, and they're all very different. But for some reason, they all move in the same direction and make the leaders autocratic. Even within the South Asian subcontinent, each country has acquired their distinct political character, which is derived from their experience and history. So in the case of Bangladesh, Professor Riaz noted the consequences of institutional changes, the role of a compliant media, legitimization of a particular ideology, and also the role of global actors that combine to strengthen the process of autocratization in Bangladesh. Now, if we ask people on the street, they will also add other factors. Corruption is something that may have contributed to the outcome. The influence of the armed services on the political system of the country, the co-optation of bureaucratic and law and order agency leadership, everything has adversely affected the system and contributed to this move towards autocratization. Now, it is no doubt that all these factors give rise to serious threats for the citizens. And once they have no other way to turn, and this again comes true in the discussion in the book, they look towards the international community to come up with some kind of help. And of course, there is the issue of activism in civil society and planned reforms that could sort of bring Bangladesh to the course on democratization. Now, I found this book very useful because I learned a lot, particularly about things that I had not thought about in the past. So we thought about the civil society activism, and Sri Radha has mentioned the Shahbag movement and the other movement by school children who were surprisingly effective in bringing back order on the streets of Dhaka. No law and order agency or no other group could perform this task. But the problem is they did not continue because of, again, the reasons I found in the book, the steps taken by the autocratic government, which was ruthless in repressing these movements. So normally civil society activists would organize protests, promote civic education, campaign for human rights, mobilize public support. But I find in the book that the scope for these activities is severely restricted in Bangladesh. About the media, again, I think the media has a very important role to play, and they could report on government abuses, corruption, authoritarian practices. But this is possible in countries where media freedom is protected, where access to information is available, and investigative journalism is supported for holding authoritarian regimes accountable. Again, I find in the book the emergence of a compliant media, and most sections of the media in Bangladesh do not live up to these expectations. And it is common knowledge that the media is controlled by a handful of dominant business houses that are owned and operated by allies of the autocratic regime. Coming to the issue of diplomatic pressure from democratic countries, international organizations, and agencies promoting human rights, I've had some explanations from Michael on the role of the US in these situations. So again, from my conversation with the people in Bangladesh, I know that they are placing their hopes on the imposition of sanctions, on the possibility of diplomatic isolation, and measures against human and labor rights violation that could indicate disapproval and encourage reforms in these areas. In addition, they talked about economic incentives and sanctions that could be forced, that could be used to force the autocratic regime to respect human rights, ensure rule of law, and perhaps initiate a transition toward democracy. The role of the international agencies come up more often in discussions with people in Bangladesh because this is probably the only channel they have left that they see could be effective. So they talk about trade agreements, development aid, foreign direct investment that could all be used in a way to persuade the government to move or step back from the extremely autocratic situation. But I think, and I agree with Professor Ali Riaz on this, interestingly, increasing competition among global and regional powers for, these might be harsh words, for reaping benefits from numerous development projects with huge amounts of investments, probably negated the prospect of checks and balances from the international community. So global and regional superpowers apparently are less interested in a change of regime that allows them to reap benefits through involvement in mega infrastructure projects. Internally, democratic institutions can be strengthened with an independent judiciary, with an independent election commission, and parliamentary oversight bodies. So if there are a set of resilient democratic institutions, they can help to prevent concentration of power and abuse by autocratic leaders. And again, the book clearly demonstrates the undesirable consequences of institutional changes that resulted in concentration of power in a single point, that is the Prime Minister's office. And it's not surprising that authoritarian rulers have no interest in political dialogue, negotiations with diverse groups, and reconciliation processes. So I think some of the points that Sri Radha raised about where is the opposition, they are locked out of the political area, and they are also not getting any kind of signals that they might be able to get back into the system through discussions and deliberations. So these activities are very, very important for addressing the underlying grievances and promoting inclusivity and constructing the grounds for democratic governance. So the other point that I want to repeat, in a sense, is that it is believed that solidarity among democratic countries, regional alliances, and global civil society networks can support efforts to challenge autocratism, to share best practices, and initiate actions for democratic actions. But of course, these require very, very serious rethinking about existing situations and strategies, and also long-term engagements by committed and persistent stakeholders who will engage in coalition building with relevant agencies. So I think in a nutshell, these conditions are not present in contemporary Bangladesh. But I'm more interested in the final chapter where Professor Ali Riaz looks forward to what's coming up next. And his suggestion is that it could be status quo or change of course. To me, status quo is probably not as bad as continuation of what's going on, because it could get worse. Bangladesh has been moving progressively from democracy to hybrid rule to autocracy. And if it continues, that'll be a big problem. But changing courses, there are a number of challenges. I think political leadership in Bangladesh is a factor that contributed to the entrenchment of autocratic rule in the country. Because the health of a political party depends on a systematic circulation of leadership that arises from the ranks. Members of political parties work through their careers and demonstrate commitment to the ideology of the party. And it is truly unfortunate that the two major political parties in Bangladesh and the third insignificant party that is now recognized as the official opposition in the parliament have completely failed to understand and employ this practice. All three political parties are rooted in families or dynasties, and it is inconceivable that anyone outside of the three families would be considered qualified to lead them. So the other leaders in these parties who may be capable, who may be efficient, who may have the right attitude towards politics, know that they have no chance of becoming a prime minister or the head of the party any day. So they have to adjust their behavior and sort of spend their time talking about the leaders and praising them. So autocratic tendencies are deeply entrenched in these institutions, and there is no possibility of electing leaders on the basis of democratic practices. So it is not surprising that leaders of the parties concentrate on glorifying the existing leaders or the prime ministers and generally begin and end their statements and speeches with glowing comments on the three families, respectively. I think that's an issue that should be addressed if we really want to break this barrier of autocratic regime. There should be a democratic process of electing leaders of parties and allowing them to head parties and become prime minister. The other issue I find is the replication of the autocratic style at all levels. So while in the family tradition, I think there are several members of one family in the parliament now, because once a member passes away, obviously another member of this family will be nominated and put in parliament. So power is actually concentrated not only in the prime minister's family, but also in the family of the 300. I wouldn't count the women members into this, the 300 members of the parliament who have some kind of connections and work together. But this is replicated at all levels. So going down the hierarchy, if you look at the divisional, district, upazila and union levels, at every level, there are family linkages between the leaders. So it is actually a fortress in which outsiders cannot enter. And that is definitely not a good thing for reversing course or changing course back to democracy. And the final point I want to make is about the comment I started with, is we really don't know what drives leaders to become autocrats. And here's an answer I have for myself. It may not be correct, but I think autocratism arises out of insecurity and lack of confidence. It seems that the leaders do not believe that if they do good work, which they keep on telling us all the time, we have done excellent work, and then they put it to test in the elections, they could probably win the elections. But they don't have that much confidence. As a result, they try to change rules, they try to distort the practices and use all kinds of both legal and illegal practices to make sure that the elections are designed in a way that they will win. So I think changing course is probably a very good possibility, but all these obstacles need to be overcome before we can really think of sort of stepping back from the autocratic practices and gradually going back to a more democratic system. So I think I fully agree that the democratic processes like elections, freedom of the media, civil liberties are controlled to ensure continuation in power by the autocratic regimes. So they undermine the legitimacy of democratic institutions and create the perception of unfairness or illegitimacy among the citizens. Citizens know that this is what's going on, but the section that benefits from these autocratic rules support it anyway. The others, as Riaz said, just step away from the electoral arena and do not take part. So it is not surprising that the rule of law is undermined because political expediency is prioritized over legal principles and constitutional norms. Arbitrary use of power, absence of an independent judiciary, and selective application of laws can weaken the protections and undermine rights of citizens. So I fully agree with Professor Ali Riaz's analysis of the context and circumstances of democratic backsliding in Bangladesh, particularly since 2009. So I found the book very useful and enlightening, and I believe it's a major contribution to the literature and will help readers understand the obstacles to the development of Bangladesh as a vibrant democratic country. I'd like to congratulate Professor Ali Riaz for drawing our attention to this critical issue that needs to be understood and addressed, not only by academics, but by the wider community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Huck, and thank you to all of our panelists for your insightful comments. Hopefully this discussion has whetted everyone's appetite to read the book, and I'm pleased to announce that the book is available through Amazon, both in hard and soft copies, and is also available through the publisher. So I hope that all of our attendees have an opportunity to read the book as well going forward. So we have about 20 minutes or so left for a discussion. The way I propose we proceed is first, Ali, if there's any issues that our panelists have raised in their interventions that you want to address at this point, I'll give you the floor. And then we'll turn to a Q&A period. We have some questions from the audience, and I know we have some questions from the RTF team as well. So we'll, again, Ali, have you take a crack at those, but then we'll invite our panelists also to chime in the Q&A section. So Ali, first, we'll turn to you to address any issues or expand upon anything that our panelists have raised.
Thank you, John. Just a few quick things. First of all, thanks to all the participants for making these comments. Some of the comments Dr. Sridhar Datta has made, as well as Dr. Ahmed Shafiqullah, possibly needs to be attended to. The first thing that I would say, this general notion which Professor Datta has raised, which is where is the opposition and what is the vision of the opposition? This is a very usual question, but I tend to disagree with that question. The reason being, in Bangladesh history since 1991, no opposition actually came up with a vision and captured the state power. Never. So suddenly, after this country has become autocratic, we are asking opposition to offer something that would transcend the vision of the autocrats. It's basically going to somehow fall flat, because always in 1991, 96, 2001, 2008, it is anti-incumbency. The way I put it, always, right or wrong, in Bangladesh, political parties don't win. Political parties, incumbent loses the election. It has been the case. So is it expected of opposition, as in India that Michael has mentioned with respect to, or for that, but in the United States, to offer a vision? It is. Ideally, it is. It should be. But at the same time, in a very weak democratic environment where institutions have not been built since the independence, and particularly since 1991, when it was expected, suddenly out of nowhere, such an expectation might put a burden on the opposition, which they are not ready to bear. Had it been Awami League in the opposition, I would have said the same thing. It's not about BNP. You know, what was the vision of Awami League, as a matter of fact, when it won in 2008? Did it tell us that the caretaker government would be abolished? No, they didn't. Did they tell us that the power will be concentrated in the hands of one single person? No, they didn't. Did they tell us that economy would actually be used as a tool for justifying, and in some cases with the made-up numbers, that to justify the regression of democracy? No, they didn't. So what were the visions? Hence, that is number one that I always think. But it is a pertinent question that has been in this context, that then what happened to the civil society? I mean, not only opposition, but what about the civil society? Why they're not there? Yeah, Professor Datta has rightly pointed out, Professor Shafiqullah has mentioned some of this, is the fear, enormous fear. State in 1990, often I've seen comparison between 1990 and the movement, as well as with what is happening now, why it doesn't happen as it happened in 1990, because we are not in 1990. The state has become enormously powerful. Post 2009, especially, but it started a little earlier, the state has become enormous. Imagine the surveillance capacity of the state. I mean, if we look at the Bangladeshi state today, and if you compare it with the military regimes from 75 to 1990, it is incomparable because those regimes were nowhere close to what this regime has. Technology improved, they borrowed, bought, used, and so on and so forth. So technological advancement has given them discussion. The civil society has been vitiated with the partisan natures, thanks to the civil society members as well. There is very hardly a position that we do not see in partisan at this moment. They have been cajoled, they have been lured into, in some cases, out of benefits, in some cases, just fear and all sorts of things. And then we have this legal apparatus of 2016 law. That needs to be seen. With respect to the removal of the caretaker government, two things should be noted here, and which I mentioned in passing or in some ways in my book, is that the court verdict that is being repeatedly referred to, if we look at the short order and the longish version of it, there is a serious discrepancy. And then Chief Justice has done something that is unacceptable. He has changed the verdict. Because in case of my understanding of judicial, the verdict is a verdict is a verdict. Meaning once it is written, there's nothing called short verdict. That is the verdict. And then you can go on and explain it. The verdict that came out of the short order didn't say that it has to be scrapped immediately. Didn't say it. It took 14 months for the Chief Justice who went into retirement, wrote this thing the way he wanted it to be written. That needs to be. The second thing is the parliamentary committee, which came up with very clear understanding until the last minute, the last meeting with the Prime Minister, that they would like to maintain the caretaker government with necessary amendments, such as defining that it should be 3 months, 90 days, defining that it has no power whatsoever beyond everyday, administration. They cannot sign contract or so on and so forth. They cannot change anything. That dramatically changed. It is a committee composed of, and unfortunately, however you put it, BNP didn't participate in that committee, but the committee met hundreds of people, 104 to be precise, and most of them actually said that this should be kept. The committee's recommendation, and anyone who has read those minutes, which I did, clearly showed that they said that it should be with necessary correction until the last meeting with the Prime Minister. So which basically tells us that it is the decision of an individual to change it rather than the committee, rather than the court, which by definition is very much a personalistic thing. I would not take more time. The final point that I would like to make, of course, what Professor Shafqullah has mentioned with respect to the corruption, the influence of the army intelligence bureaucracy and so on and so forth. So absolutely, you are correct in the sense. But those things have come into play because of this crony system that has been created to sustain the regime by force as well as creating some sort of an ideological rationale. They have been bought into this. They became the beneficiary of it. So long they are beneficiary of the bureaucracy, the beneficiary. Look at the simple the parks they get, and increasing parks of the bureaucracy, the military, the intelligence, and all sorts of things. So corruption is absolutely a fundamental thing, but that corruption flourished because the basic governance seems to be rely on those, right? And a final point, whether India's role in this, whether if India hadn't supported, would that have persisted? Would this be the trajectory of Awami League? I don't think that Awami League could venture into this kind of situation unless there is a clear, significant support from the neighboring country. Had this support come from China, they would have had a second thought. But given that there's a convergence of interest of China and India, and this is very interesting in Myanmar and Bangladesh, China, India converge elsewhere there, and whether India's argument that they are going to face, they are going to act as an antidote to China in Bangladesh. I'm not convinced yet, because if I look at the data since 2009, when about India had enormous influence on Bangladesh government. That is the period when China actually extended its influence. So if they have not succeeded for the last 15 years, what gives the idea that they're going to succeed in the next 5 years? However, they're convincing it in Washington. I'm still not convinced of this, that this should be the case. So I'll stop there. I've taken a lot of time. Thanks, John.
Great. Thanks, Ali. Bill, as promised, I'll hand it over to you. If you have any issues that you want to bring up based on the discussion, what you've heard thus far, any questions you'd like Ali or any of the panelists to expand upon, the floor is yours. You're still muted, Bill.
There. Okay, can you hear me?
Sure, we got you. Go ahead.
Okay. I was fascinated by most of the discussion of all the discussants, all the panelists, and includes Ali for sure. And the thing that interests me, and I've got notes about it down here, was that almost every speaker, and even Ali in his second intervention, talked about the opposition and made it an interesting part of the discussion. Even Michael talked about the weakness of the opposition in India. And I'm wondering if any of the panelists or all of them would like to elaborate on discussions of how the opposition or the weakness thereof is a factor in the historical significance of the way of the path to autocracy that Bangladesh and other countries have taken. And I'm thinking in particular because it struck me as one of the great political mistakes of South Asia and probably of wider areas is the failure in I think it was 2014. When was it that the opposition in Bangladesh boycotted the election? That was on when was that? But anyway, whenever it was, I'd like to ask if that was a big turning point, not only in Bangladesh, but in South Asia altogether. And I would hope that all of the, because Mr. Huck had some interesting thoughts about the opposition or the opposition in these elections. So Ali had a great response to that. So each of them have said something about oppositions, and I'd love to have them elaborate a little bit on how they feel the opposition has created the path that that Bangladesh and other countries are taking towards autocracy. So,
right. Thanks,
Bill. Stir up the panelists to do that.
Sure. And since you addressed that to all the panelists, I'll ask each in turn. We'll follow the same order that we did with the initial discussions, and then Ali will give you a final crack at it. So, Michael, anything you want to say further about the issue Bill raised about the role of the opposition?
Well, look, it's obviously a complicated issue, and I actually didn't make myself many new friends among those within the opposition when I actually opposed. I thought what I had said that I thought it was not a good idea for the opposition to boycott this most recent election. I mean, we know the story about what happened previously, but I would argue that by deciding not to participate in this year's election, the BNP essentially allowed the Awami League to be in a position where it didn't have to work as hard to try to rig the election, right? It all became rather absurd and farcical, quite frankly. But yeah, I think that there's so many other factors at play here. I don't know if I'd overstate the issue of the opposition's weakness or strength or whatever the case may be. There's a lot of factors here that have allowed the Awami League to get to the position where it is now. But Yeah, I think that I understand that opposition members and supporters would say that why would they want to participate in a system that they know is rigged and illegitimate, and they had that core demand of a caretaker government coming back into play, and so on. I acknowledge all that, but my view is that if the opposition was looking for support from the international community to bring more attention and put more pressure on the Awami League for what had happened in the lead up to the election and on election day itself, it's harder to do that if you yourself decide not to participate in the election. Because again, the Awami League did not have to work as hard to engage in rigging, because it was essentially running against itself.
Great, thank you, Michael. Sri Radha, any thoughts on this topic?
I completely agree with Michael here on this point, but also just a bit of a leadership crisis. I think that's something. Am I audible? Am I audible now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I said I agree with what Michael said, but I'll just add the problem that specifically Bangladesh and also something for India is a leadership crisis. This family hierarchy legacy is something which is clearly, still kind of the backgrounder to what the BNP is. And there is an issue there physically. We all know about that. And Fazlur Rahman or the other BNP leaders clearly were not positioning themselves as the alternate PM here. And I think the problem within BNP is actually another factor as to why and where this government has been able to take it forward. I mean, it's completely its own creativity, that's no doubt about that. But the lack of BNP's role here in even addressing many of the issues that the country was facing is something that I think we have to look at that particular issue. That house it, and we've always seen, and a Jatiya Party was mentioned, I think, in some context by Professor Haq or somebody, and it's always been a small party. It's always been a party which kind of jumps from one to the other. They are constantly suffering the whole corruption issue. We've seen within Jatiya Party there are issues, so let's not even discuss that. But within BNP, its own weakness has actually also led to a reinstatement of what Awami League has been able to pursue and successfully put in place. So there's no denying on that, and I don't think BNP should not be able to, face that. Similarly for India, while the federal system we have, whether it's Bengal, whether it's Orissa, whether it's Rajasthan, there are some very established, well-known state leaders. But at the national level, we still see there's a crisis of leadership. And there has been a problem about how Congress is not able to put up a politically capable leader. And while, of course, this time it seems that Rahul Gandhi's rating seems to be far higher than it ever was, but clearly India is looking for somebody else. And again, in this deficit of crisis of leadership, Prime Minister Modi has it easy. There hasn't been, and I don't know where in billion population why we are not able to find a leader who can, ably put up another position, another stand, another vision. And I think that's something that we constantly are going to be faced with, which allows the other political leader and any leader who stays beyond 2 terms. And again, we don't have any such rule, not that does Bangladesh. They're bound to consolidate and do completely extrajudicial issues. And, let's take things to an extent which clearly reeks of misgovernance and other corrupt measures. So it's I think a lot has to be said about the lack of the role of the opposition here.
Great, thank you. Dr. Huck, anything you would like to add on this topic?
Thank you, John. Now, Bill, you've put on a new twist on this role of the opposition in strengthening autocracy. It does happen, but if you look at the history of Bangladesh, it has never been easy being in opposition. Even before the country became independent, the military rulers have been very harsh on the opposition. And after the birth of the country, it has gone through different phases of different kinds of governance. And the fact that they really want to make a contribution to the political system, but for reasons that I mentioned earlier, and Sri Radha mentioned, the leadership crisis never allowed these parties to be on strong grounds to organize and lead movements. And besides, because of the tradition of leaders getting either rewarded or punished in certain ways, the opposition could never be consolidated, except for some occasions, say in 1990, when they found no way but to be together. But as soon as that crisis was over, they felt that it is their prize for the taking, and they simply forgot about the other parties that worked with them and came down very harsh on the opposition. And because of the various things that Professor Ali Riaz mentions in his book, and I think the panelists also brought up, the way in which the country is ruled, it is possible to completely suppress opposition and keep them out of the political arena. And that's what has been happening. So I agree with Sri Radha that it's probably, it's partly the weakness of the BNP, which doesn't allow it to get a stronger foothold in the system. But it's also equally a problem with the ruling party that doesn't allow any kind of opposition. And they have constantly tried to split opposition and break them and make them into smaller groups so that they do not emerge as a threat to the system. So yes, they have contributed to the emergence of autocracy. On the other hand, autocracy is responsible for the non-emergence of stronger opposition groups.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Haq. I'm looking at the clock and I'm conscious of time because I know some of our panelists have a hard stop at 12. Ali, I'll give you the last word to talk about this issue related to opposition, but I'll add one additional topic for you to perhaps fold into it, and that has to do with the role of the United States. Again, interestingly, all of our questions from attendees basically were dancing around the same issue, is how do you evaluate the role of the United States in this process, and to what extent can you, well, basically, how do you evaluate the role of the U.S.? So, Ali, I'll let you take on those two issues, and then we'll give it to Bill for a final word, and then we'll call it a day. So, Ali, over to you.
Thank you, John. Considering the time constraint and everything, I will be very brief. First, the opposition question, particularly what Michael has alluded to, whether BNP should have participated in 2024 election. I tend to disagree with him. The reason are the following. Number one, by the time the election process started, we cannot simply forget that there was a meeting of the police headed by DIG in summer, where they clearly decided that they're going to arrest and reactivate all the cases against the BNP leaders. And in that meeting, DIG, and it was reported internationally, including the Voice of America, that they are going to, consult with the Ministry of Law and the Judiciary, the Attorney General and others. So practically, the bureaucracy, the police and the judiciary was pretty much aligned what their goal is, to keep a formidable opposition out of election, Cambodia model, period. So simply on October 31st or 1st of November, BNP couldn't have made that decision. And now one can say why BNP started not saying that one from 2023. We are going to get into the election. The entire process of the autocratic regimes, they always do that. This is a playbook. And BNP did participate in 2018 election. So what was the result? What was the international community's reaction to it? What gives a different idea that it would have been different in 2024? Just because the US made some statements? From the day one, when in May, US visa policy was issued, I told repeatedly, if anyone sitting in Washington thinks that a visa policy is going to ensure a free, fair election in an emerging autocratic regime, they're simply wrong. They're simply is an illusion. So going back to the opposition question, the opposition, the formidable opposition was muted through not only over the years, particularly beginning of 2023. If you look at the last phase that we see after BNP's December 10, 2020, December something, 2020 rally. Thereafter, and in the summer, the police's decision, and then the 20th October, all these things forced BNP. BNP doesn't have to be forced. BNP had no option whatsoever. The decision was made somewhere else that they would not allow BNP to participate, period. I mean, because the regime expected that they would be able to split the BNP, which they didn't succeed. At some point, I thought it might happen, because given the Bangladeshi culture. But the manage. In case of a general understanding whether what should be the role of the opposition, I completely agree with almost everyone saying that there should be a robust role of the opposition. But we need to be particular situation where we see this that created, and this is in a sense autocratic playbook. Cambodia has it, and we have seen in other places that how opposition has been weakened, through legal and extra-legal measures. 1,500 BNP activists and leaders were convicted over a period of 2 months between October 29th and December 28th. I'm giving the dates because I have the data. 1,500. From this summer of 2023, the courts were gone in an overdrive, reported by the Daily Star, Pratham, that they were holding session at the evening. Police were asked to appear before the courts. No independent witnesses were asked. And it is in this context election happened. What do we expect? Will people jump into it? Can they? Should they? No, I don't think that that's going to happen. Finally, the U.S. role, which I have alluded to in a sense, that U.S. rhetoric was stronger than its action. U.S. actually didn't act robust. It talked about it. And this idea that there will be a values-based diplomacy from the Biden administration was not backed up by action anywhere in the world. We expected, in a sense, that Bangladesh should be a case in this. They would make an example out of it. No, they didn't. They didn't because there are other geopolitical consideration has gone into it. So there were expectations, there were things the people expected, and a lot of things understood. Did I expect that US would be more robust given its lessons of 2013-14? In a sense, I did. But that does not mean that US actually did something other than 10, 12 visits, repeated assertion, talk, rhetoric, and a very meek policy that has resulted in nothing, which was not supposed to result something. Post-election, what would be the role? Year or two down the line, if not in 6 months, given the economic crisis that is almost imminent upon Bangladesh and other issues, US might have to revisit its policy. But would they do it? Would they go beyond its geopolitical regional consideration? That is an open question. I don't know to answer. But what US did, it raised expectation, but it actually didn't raise the expectation by action, but simple rhetoric. Thank you, John.
Great. Thank you, Ali. Well, unfortunately, I think we've come to the end of our allotted time. I know that this conversation could have kept going for quite some time. Hopefully, we'll have a chance to continue these conversations in different fora, including in future Right to Freedom events. Before we log off for the day, though, I want to just hand it back to Ambassador Milam to say the final word and send us on our way. So, Bill, over to you.
Well, thank you, John. I feel a little guilty if I extended the conversation on opposition and kept people from getting their questions in, some of our audience from getting their questions in and answered. So I apologize for that. But I don't apologize for this event. I think the questions and answers and the presentations have been excellent, and I've learned a lot. And I hope we can continue the conversations as we go along. But anyway, I want to say to all the people out there who are listening and watching, thank you for coming. It's been a great pleasure to have you, and I hope you will come back when Right to Freedom does this again. So thanks for coming, and goodbye.
Great. Thanks, Bill. Again, for everyone, we will be posting the video from this event on our social media platforms. So hopefully those who didn't have a chance to participate live can have a chance to see the discussion later. Again, the book is available through Amazon, through the publisher Routledge, and probably other outlets as well. Thank you, Dr. Riaz, for making yourself available to have this discussion. And again, thank you to our panelists. Michael Kugelman had to move off for another event, but Srirada and Shafiqul, thank you very much for your insightful comments and for your participation. And finally, as always, Mushfiq, thank you to you and your team at Right to Freedom for pulling the event together. With that, I declare today's event over and wish you all a pleasant day and a pleasant weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.